This is Uncommonly Remarkable. We have surprisingly casual discussions about the lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. Think of this podcast as an opportunity to learn something new and to pick up on an entrepreneurial tip or two through open conversation. I'm Artis Beatty. I'm a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. Welcome to the show. Today I'm joined by Bryan Hardy, holistic nutritionist and founder of Revitalized Man. Bryan nearly lost his life to a misdiagnosed ruptured appendix at age 18, setting off years of fatigue, digestive problems, and hormonal crashes. But that crisis became the catalyst for a journey into nutrition, healing, and men's health. In this episode, Bryan breaks down why gut health is the root of energy, mental clarity, and testosterone, and what every man needs to know to truly feel his best. If you've ever struggled with brain fog, low energy, or normal digestion that doesn't feel so normal, this one's for you. Ladies, gentlemen, all you remarkable people, please welcome Bryan to the show. Bryan, welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Artis, for having me. I'm excited to dive in, and I'm sure that we're going to have a very interesting and expansive conversation.
And I think we've got a lot of things to talk about. And I have been doing some episodes and really learning about health and wellness from a variety of different angles. I've talked a lot about mental health, and I've talked a lot about physical health. Gut health is one of those things that we've touched on a couple of times, and each time I learn something new and I'm able to put something new in action. So I'm really looking forward to that part of our conversation. So to level set everybody, why don't you tell us a little bit about Bryan? Tell us about who you are and what you do today, and then we'll talk a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you for that. So to make a long story short and easy to digest, pun intended, when I was 18 years old, I had always been, into fitness, into sports, basically I wanted to be like a, action star ninja, growing up. So I would watch these movies, I would watch, different shows on TV, and I think, I can do that. And I'd just climb trees and climb buildings and try to jump over car hoods and skateboard and mountain bike and all these fun things, which I came to realize later was my neurochemistry is really wired for adrenaline, which is why I'm drawn to extreme kind of activities. But all that is to say, I was physically very active, but nutritionally, I ate very kind of, average, I would say. So, mom would cook nice dinners in the evening, but up until that point was a whole lot of not so great stuff. And I was, of course, addicted to sugar, like most kids are if they get access to that kind of thing. Addicted to dairy in a large part, also lactose intolerant, which is a bad combination if you want to feel good and not be bloated and gassy. Yeah, it got worse over time to where I really realized, okay, there's something going on here. But just to say, I did not grow up, being aware of nutrition and health and all these kinds of things. This all came after what was the turning point for me, which was I was 18 years old, first year of university, whole life ahead of me, feeling great. And I just got really sick in the first week of my second semester, first year. So January, I got really sick and I felt weird. It didn't feel like a normal kind of a flu or fever. But I had those symptoms, but I also had this weird feeling in my stomach, but it wasn't localized to the right side at all. I say that because if anyone's had appendicitis or known someone who's had appendicitis, that's a telltale sign. And when that's there, it's like, okay, go to the emergency room. They're probably going to take it out. And it's a fairly straightforward recovery process if they do it in time.
Right.
Mine was not done in time. So I was just sick as a dog for 4 or 5 days. And then eventually the pain got so intense, it drove me to the hospital. And that hospital completely missed, the doctor I saw rather, completely missed what was going on. So he did an x-ray, gave me a ton of painkillers, which helped. I was glad to have those. But he did an x-ray and poked my belly a few times and then told me I had the flu. And here I am, 3 a.m. in the morning. I haven't eaten in 5 days. I haven't used the bathroom in 5 days. Not to be TMI. but talking about bowel movements and things like this comes with the territory when you're a nutritionist and focusing on gut health. So, sick for 5 days, hadn't eaten anything, hadn't used the bathroom. I'm on like 2 shots of morphine, just sitting in this wheelchair they put me in. And I'm just like, I felt like I was dying. And here they're saying, go home and sleep it off. And luckily I didn't do that, because I would have ended up in I might not be here today. My mom came, picked me up from school, drove me, went to a different hospital. They did a CT scan. They say, you're a mess inside. We have to do surgery right now. You might wake up with a colostomy bag if it's worst case, but hopefully it's just your appendix. Luckily it was. And so they cut me open, a big old incision right down the middle, cut me open, cleaned me up, pumped me full of antibiotics for about 2 weeks. I lost about 20 pounds during those 2 weeks, just being mostly bedridden and on a liquid diet. And it showed me a few things. First of all, how fragile life is, how close I had come to not being here. Mm-hmm. And also that I needed to pay attention to what I was doing, because clearly, something wasn't working. Like, this shouldn't just happen. And when I asked the doctors and the nurses, like, why did this happen? Like, was there anything I could have done to prevent this? And they said, well, we don't really know why it happens. It's kind of genetic, and it kind of just seems to happen to some people, but like, don't worry about that. Just focus on your recovery, focus on feeling better, and don't worry about it too much. And that was not satisfactory to my, at that time, engineering mind. I was studying automotive engineering technology, and I've always loved to know how things work. And so it's like, okay, that answer is very lackluster in terms of getting to some sort of reason or understanding in terms of how this happened, why this happened, and what I should do moving forward to prevent future, medical issues from taking place. And that sent me to a multi-year recovery. I didn't understand anything about probiotics, so I went back to eating like a university student, binge drinking beer on weekends, pizza, takeout, all this kind of stuff. Created all kinds of imbalance, yeast imbalance, bad bacteria, you name it. So that led me to basically bloated all the time, can't digest most of my food, gassy all the time, tired all the time, can't think, can't stay awake in class, no sex drive, no libido. And I'm like 19 years old. All right. I'm like, this is not right. This is definitely not right. And I saw a naturopathic doctor who had been caring for my mother at the time, as she had been recovering from stage 1 breast cancer. And that naturopathic doctor recommended me a book on nutrition called The Thrive Diet. And it was reading that book that blew my mind to see just how impactful food and nutrition can be. And how we can use specific foods, specific herbs, specific natural supplements, vitamins, minerals, etc., to drive performance and to help our bodies work better, our brains work better, of course, our guts work better, and that usually happens in a synergistic fashion, because what's good for the gut is also good for the brain, right? Is also good for the immune system, and so that just like set me on fire, and I basically unofficially decided that I was just gonna obsess about this and study this first until I could get myself feeling better, which took about 4 years of kind of trial and error and working through various things. So that was my personal thing. And then by the time I made it through that, I'm like, well, this is the only thing I really care about. I'm not going to go back to designing car parts and sitting on a computer, which I would never survive doing that kind of work anyways. I'm far too high energy and, people oriented to do that. And so I ended up leaving the university model after doing a year of all the basic, pre-med courses on that track, thinking, naturopathic medicine, chiropractic medicine, but then deciding 7 more years of full-time school and a couple $100,000 of debt before I could start helping people was definitely not something I could happily take on. And that led me to the Institute of Holistic Nutrition, which is a fantastic private institution up here in Canada. And they now serve people online. Thank you, COVID. But at that point, it was all in person, all in class, and really university level chemistry, biochemistry, anatomy, physiology, paired with, Eastern medicine, Ayurveda, herbalism, applied nutrition, all these various things that really brought together a great foundation for me to understand a bigger picture and then to be able to serve people in that fashion. And I've been doing that ever since, and full time since late 2019, specifically working with men who are struggling with both digestive issues as well as brain and fatigue kind of symptoms that tend to come in that package.
Wow. Wow. What an amazing story. Before you had the appendicitis, if you think about how you felt leading up to that versus what happened as you began your recovery and you realized, man, I'm not feeling great. Were you feeling some of those same things before the appendicitis and just considered them to be normal, or was that something that happened after the appendicitis only?
No, it was definitely my entire life pretty well, both because I was eating, right? Not a whole lot of soluble fiber, not a whole lot of fresh vegetables and fruit in my diet
Hmm.
for many years. And so lots of dairy, lots of gluten, lots of grains, lots of heavy, sticky, hard to digest material, combined with improper mechanics for sitting on a toilet, right? Most people are sitting, not squatting, and it causes all kinds of constipation and issues with elimination.
Mm.
And so my entire life, basically, I had been constipated and not realized, right? I didn't know it wasn't supposed to be
Oh,
hard to use the bathroom. I thought that's just what you did. You went in, you sat on the toilet for like 15, 20 minutes or more and squeezed a bunch, and then found some relief and got on with your day. And so it wasn't until a few years later I realized, oh, we're actually supposed to squat to go number two. What a concept, right? And that has changed a whole lot to the point where now I basically, if I don't have to, I will refuse to use a toilet that I can't squat at. If I'm in a public restroom and there's a garbage can, I'm going to flip that garbage can over or pull it over or do something to get my feet up to make it for a much easier, effortless evacuation. But so yeah, my entire life I was constipated. I was not digesting or very tolerant of these things I was addicted to, which is another theme we can touch on. That so
mm.
often the foods that we think we can't live without, right? What I hear from most people is cheese, right? Cheese, coffee, red wine. These are a few. Many times that's because your immune system is actually reacting to those foods, which, if you're in a chronically low energy kind of depleted state, is going to give you a hit of stress hormones, and it's going to feel good, right? So people think, oh, I
Mm.
couldn't
Wow.
possibly live
Okay.
without that. I love that. That's my favorite food. But when we have intestinal hyperpermeability, aka leaky gut, when that's going on and we've got digestive issues, the things we consume the most frequently, the most commonly, are likely to be the things that we're reacting to the most as well. And it's not to say you can't ever have those things, because you can reverse a food sensitivity. But it is to say we need to be really, really attentive to how you feel when you eat certain things, and to not just take your baseline, which for me, constipation was the baseline. I thought that was normal, right? Most people, if they've never done a really clean diet or an elimination diet or even dairy and gluten free for a month or two, if they've never done that, they have no baseline for what they actually feel like in the absence of those foods, which in my experience, 90+% of the time are going to be causing some level of distress, both in the digestive tract, and then it can also, bleed out into the immune system and into our cognition.
Now that, I mean, I think that's a really, really fair point. Baseline or establishing baseline is one of those things that is very difficult to do unless you're forced into it for most folks, right? Because you've got the specific things that you enjoy or the things that are available to you. And so you make those your habituals. And so resetting that and deciding I'm going to eliminate all of these things or a lot of these things that I'm used to having, to figure out if I feel better, is very difficult for folks. I mostly hear people do it when they're forced to. So they've had some extreme digestive distress, or they have some extreme illness, and then they start to eliminate things one at a time to figure out where the problem may have come from. But that may not be the best way to approach it if you're trying to look for the way to feel your best or be your best.
Yeah, and luckily there's some pretty darn effective forms of testing we can do now, right? So if someone isn't ready to take on an elimination diet, which is quite an endeavor, it's not an easy thing to do. It becomes easier once you get into a few weeks of doing it. You get into a rhythm. And most people tend to realize, oh, this is great. It really simplifies my choices. And I just feel better, right? I feel more energized. I feel clearer mentally. If they work out, I'm recovering from my workouts more rapidly. So that's, once they get a taste of those benefits, it tends to self-reinforce. But you can do both. There's some decent blood testing you can do. And that'd be more like a functional food sensitivity test if people are looking for like what to Google or what to ask their doctor about. And then one I've come across recently, and I can, share links to all these things for anyone interested. But one I've come across more recently, which I've seen to be quite effective and also non-invasive and very inexpensive, which is great, is something called a bioresonance test. And so this is looking at sensitivities more on a energetic or electric kind of level. Because what you start to realize, the deeper you get into health and food and nutrition and all these things, is that biochemistry is important, and almost underneath biochemistry is like the physics of how our bodies work, right? The charges that are involved, the positives, the negatives, and the resonance or not dissonance, right, that we might have with a certain food. And so, and there's many ways to look at this, and I won't, get into it too much, but just to know that there have been very, very well vetted technologies around for decades at this point that can use things like the acupuncture meridian system, right, which we know to be legit and to have strong effects for all kinds of things. And that's working on electrical signals, right? We know that we can use something like that to measure how, I'll say, beneficial or not a certain food or herb or whatever, supplement of any kind, is going to be for you. So yeah, I highly recommend people to look into these things and just to know that there are ways to do this and to get a good sense of what you're likely reacting to without having to be a super, mad scientist and like eliminate everything from your life for 30 days and then slowly, piece by piece, reintroduce. Because that's not easy. It is worth it, but it's not easy.
That's fair. Bryan, you mentioned you received a book after the surgery, and that book is kind of gave you the spark. What was it in the book that was the spark for you that made you think, man, I really been thinking about this the wrong way, and I really think I should pursue it differently?
Yeah. So again, my interest in athletics and being fit and being strong and being, not specifically, I was never specifically dedicated to one sport. I played tennis, I played hockey, I skateboarded, I rollerbladed, I did weightlifting. I wanted to be just well-versed and well-rounded across the board. And so this book in particular the author was coming at it from a endurance performance lens, because that was his sport of choice at the time. He was running triathlons. And so it showed me that, okay, you can use food and specific combinations of food both to perform better as an athlete, to last longer in the race or in your training, and to use more of the herbs, vitamins, minerals to support the endocrine system, to support your recovery, to support your ability to train more consistently. And so it was just seeing food as, where up until then, I was pretty much, eat your protein, right? Get enough protein was like my main rule of nutrition, as long as I was working out and lifting weights. So get enough protein, get enough calories, because I've always been very lean. So for me to gain weight, I have to kind of force feed myself. So get enough protein, get enough calories, and eat what tastes good. Right? That was like my operating system. That's all I knew. And now I've got this guy showing me, oh, there's all these different factors. And when you play with those and manipulate those and bring in more support on essentially a cellular level, you can get so much more out of your system. You can feel so much better. So that really spoke to me. And just, it got my experimenter mind thinking like, okay, what can I do? And so the next day, pretty much, I'm at the bulk food store looking for, gelatinized maca powder, or, organic pea protein, like all these different things, which now are quite common, but this was like 2009, 2010. So not quite as popular.
Yeah.
And I became, the kid showing up to his lectures with a liter of freshly made, homemade green juice instead of, coffee and Timbits, which are, Tim Hortons, if people aren't aware, they're basically small donut little things. And that's what most of my colleagues would have, right? They'd have a breakfast sandwich, they'd have their whatever, scrambled eggs and a coffee or an iced cappuccino or whatever it was. And I'm there with a mason jar of green stuff. And I felt ashamed. Honestly, I would hide the jar under my desk and just quietly take sips because I didn't want people thinking I was weird. And now it's like the total opposite, right? Now green juice is like a status symbol, which is really funny.
Everybody's got it.
Yeah, really funny. But just to show where the culture was at that time, it was quite a different place.
And how did you start to think about taking it from I'm doing this for myself to, you know what, other people could benefit from what I've learned, and so I really want to start to help other people look at things differently. Like, how did that transition happen?
Yeah, so like most people or many people that I've met, you have a health crisis of some sort. It really causes you to reorient your life. And many times, it certainly was the case for me, and I've seen it so many times across the board, is that the more you take your health seriously and start to feel better and better, you tend to want to, most people end up with some form of either personal development or spiritual seeking, spiritual development, spiritual practice. These things tend to go together. And so I was just reading things, listening to things, studying great authors. And when I would talk to my friends, I would just be so enthusiastic, right? And I love to talk. I think I was kind of born to speak. At least part of what I'm here for is to share and to speak. And so I would talk to my friends, and we'd be done a conversation. They'd just look at me and say, "You're like a really inspirational guy, man." And I'd be like, "Oh, okay. Thank you. Like, this is just what I'm learning and what's working for me." And so, amazing. And so I got that feedback enough times, and then having worked with a naturopathic doctor, and then becoming a voracious podcast, consumer. And at that point, there was a good amount of health-focused podcasts available. And I was seeing, okay, these people are clearly, this is what they're doing, right? Whether they're a nutritionist, a personal trainer, they're sharing a message. They're oftentimes developing books or products or courses, and they're helping people. And it's a viable way of living and a viable way of creating a career path for yourself that is outside of the standard, go to school, get a job kind of format. And it made a lot of sense for me. And I've always been one to kind of go against the grain, as it were. Never really feel like I was fitting in to normal standard culture. And so it just progressed. It was really just having in-person mentors and practitioners who really gave me a ton of support and a ton of empowerment to feel better. And then seeing these examples of people who were doing this full time and sharing a message and thinking, okay, I guess I'm doing this.
And so when you started to think about the effect that that gut health can have on people, I mean, I think we talk a little bit sometimes about all of the autoimmune disorders that are out there. People are sensitive to something that has now triggered their immune system, that's now made them have an autoimmune reaction. And we were talking a little bit before we got started, and there may be ways to help mitigate some of those types of changes or reduce the effects of some of those types of changes that can really start in the gut. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
100%. And I mean, it started off as book knowledge because in school we learned that autoimmunity in the majority of cases is going to have as one of its ingredients or precipitating factors is going to have this intestinal hyperpermeability, right? So, AKA leaky gut, which some doctors still deny is a thing, which to me is mind-blowing because there's a lot of research about these things. But the whole idea there for people who aren't familiar, I'll make it really short and simple, is that when the lining of usually the intestine, the small intestine, where the majority of absorption is happening in terms of your nutrition, when that lining is damaged, and it could be damaged from actual chemical toxicity, it could be damaged, physically damaged, either from trauma, from overexertion. If you're an athlete, you've been running for 4 hours in the hot sun, that can cause temporary, gaps in that lining, in the integrity of that lining. Or it can be damaged from pathogenic bacteria, parasitic infection, yeast overgrowth, you name it. And so when that is present, what tends to happen is pieces of usually proteins, because proteins are, and amino acids, but more so proteins are what the immune system responds to as an invader, right? And so we get a piece of undigested protein. Maybe it's a little bit of casein from some milk you had, or it's a little bit of gluten from a piece of bread you had. Those are two common ones. That protein gets through that gap where it's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be in your bloodstream because it's not broken down into its amino acid parts where the body will then use it for whatever it's going to use it for. And so the immune system sees this and it says, okay, this is an invader. This is not supposed to be here. We need to tag this. We need to attack this. We need to get it out of the body. And if those proteins happen to resemble proteins in your own tissue, that's where there's this like misidentification that takes place. But again, the first ingredient, or one of the key ingredients to this, was the fact that it got through that gut lining, which is supposed to be an impermeable barrier. It got through that lining in the first place. So it goes to suggest that if we can fix whatever's causing that leakiness in that barrier, then we can give the immune system a break, stop triggering it day in and day out, which is usually happening if you're eating, something you're reacting to 3 times a day, 4 times a day as a staple food, then it's just constant being triggered, which is very draining. It's very taxing for you energetically as well, which is why fatigue shows up for most of these people. And so knowing that was like, okay, cool. So I've got the framework, and I had to do a bunch of rebalancing of my own system because I had a terrible yeast overgrowth after, massive amounts of antibiotics and then back to standard eating and then overgrowth and just everything was a mess. So I had rebalanced that in myself. And then I had a client come to me, someone who was referred to me, who had a diagnosis of ankylosing spondylitis, a very painful condition, essentially inflammation and fusing of his spine due to this autoimmune, reactivity happening. And to his credit, he was very open. He didn't want to go directly onto the heavy-duty immune suppressing drugs that would be typically prescribed, and he wanted to see what was available. He was in his early 30s. And so he was curious, he was open, and he got referred to me, and I ended up helping him and his wife. His wife went along. She didn't have the same condition. She had some stuff that was not great, but she, adopted everything he was doing just to make it easy. Which I always say, if you're in a relationship, you have a partner, the more that you can be supportive of this journey and do it together, just the better outcomes everyone's going to have and the more manageable and enjoyable the experience is going to be.
Sure.
And so they did it together. And within a period, so when I first met him, if he were to, now at this point, he didn't know what he was reacting to. He just knew if I have a flare up, I'm basically in bed for 1 to 2 days, heavy duty painkillers, and then balancing that out with heavy duty stimulants, right on top of coffee and sugar, heavy duty stimulants like ADHD medication just to be functional, right? Because he was running his own business. He didn't have staff. He could, tell them to do all the work. He was running everything. So it all depended on him. And so he was back and forth, sedatives, painkillers, stimulants, sugar. It was a really, really not a great place. Within 10 weeks of being very strict on first eliminating the pathogenic bacteria, the yeast overgrowth, eliminating all that stuff, which we did naturally with antifungals and antimicrobial herbs, and then reintroducing enzyme support, probiotics support, anti-inflammatory foods in terms of what he was eating from, very, very, simplified anti-inflammatory template, and then focusing on regenerating that lining, that stomach lining, right, or the intestine lining, focusing on what are the herbs we can use or the amino acids, things like L-glutamine, things like slippery elm, root, which is an herbal medicine. These things, which are very soothing and supportive to that lining, we go through that in a stepwise fashion. And at that point, he was both feeling better than he had felt in like a decade. He's like, okay, this is, fantastic. This is working for me. And then he got exposed to, we later found out it was a combination of soy and gluten that was in a sauce at a Thai restaurant that he didn't know was in there. And instead of 2 days in bed and having to go straight to those painkillers and being basically knocked out, it took about 3 hours for him to feel more like sort of back to his baseline, which is still not ideal, but it's a whole lot better than 1 to 2 days. And this was in a 2 to 3 month period, so it doesn't have to take months and months and months for people to notice significant changes, because when you give the body what it needs and you remove what is holding it back, it wants to bounce back, right? It wants to regenerate. It wants to be resilient and really show up in the way that it's designed to, which in my view is one of vitality. It's one of performing as a miraculous, interconnected system of systems that is always doing its best to support us.
That's amazing. And so with this gentleman, I would assume you guys did some of the testing that you mentioned earlier to understand what he was sensitive to, or did you eliminate things off the bat?
Yeah, we didn't even need to. And at that point in time, I didn't have easy ways for people to do this kind of testing. This was, some years ago. And so in those cases, and especially because, he didn't have an infinite amount of funds to work with. And so when someone's more on a budget, I'd much rather them put that money towards really good, clean food and really good therapeutic grade supplementation rather than the testing, because symptoms alone can tell you like 90+% of what's going on, right? So we could do testing and it would confirm what we're already going to do. So in that case, I'd much rather just treat first, right? And if there's something lingering after we treat, then we could go back and do testing and dig a bit deeper. But in most cases, when you have the right approach, that treatment period is going to ameliorate, all of the main issues. And so you're just, repurposing those funds to something that's, you have to use them anyway, right? There's no getting to where you want to get to without these pieces. And so let's just put your budget into that. Make sure you've got enough to make it through this period. And then worry about anything that's lingering on the backside.
Fair. So what led you then to concentrate more specifically on men's health with the Revitalized Man?
Yeah, so it was a very natural process in 2 ways. I come to realize in my mid to late 20s that I had been really blessed to have grown up in father-son groups with my dad in the church, going on retreats together, doing fun things together, doing scary things together sometimes too, and sharing really openly and honestly, but in a supportive way. So I had that from being, halfway through elementary school up until the end of high school, which I came to realize later is not that common. Even these days, not even everyone has a father, at home for those years, let alone someone that's taking them to these things where they're bonding with other men and boys and really, breaking some of the stigma about, you can't cry, you have to always keep it together, suck it up, move forward. There was some of that in my childhood, certainly, but there was also this more sensitive side, which was super empowering. And so exploring that further, going on men's retreats, finding men's circles, when I was older in my mid to late 20s, and seeing how much of a gap there was and how so many guys didn't have any reference of anything like this. And seeing how women tended to have many options and to be pretty proactive in terms of finding care for themselves, finding support, finding options, especially in holistic health. It's a female-dominated field. And so I thought, okay, clearly there's guys that need support. Clearly there's guys that are going to feel more comfortable talking to another man that they can relate to. They can sort of drop the mask. They can be real with, and they can talk about anything with, and I'm not going to judge them or ridicule them or whatever, because I can relate. And so it was really that. It was seeing that, this gap in terms of public facing options that were specifically supporting men. And then seeing that space of working with men and listening to men and just also challenging their thinking in the ways that it's not serving them, those were things that I had picked up rather unintentionally just by living life. And I saw how valuable those things were to support people, specifically in the context of taking their health back.
I think that is an amazing point. I mean, when you think about just men in general and the way we tend to approach healthcare, we're pretty gung ho on the fitness side. You know, I can go, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to do these things, I'm going to kind of handle it on my own. But most even symptom driven healthcare visits are really tough for most men to do. And if you think about the world of, say, eating disorders or depression, or you can almost name it, right? You tend to have more frequent diagnosis and treatment options for female. And so it was interesting to me when we started talking that you were focusing specifically on men, because I do think it's an area that is missing or it's not readily available for most men to be able to find a male-driven professional to help them with something that may be very sensitive for them when they start to explore it.
Totally. Yeah, so that was really it, and it's been quite a journey. That I'm very glad I said yes to that, and because prior to that I worked with anybody, and it was great, and I helped some women, and it was fantastic. But also, I'm not a woman, right? And I don't understand the intricacies of like a hormonal cycle, right? So rather than try to figure that stuff out, let me just deal with the same sort of, systems and patterns that I have and just focus on that.
Yeah. So if people are really starting to think, man, this could be something that could help me, where would they go to find you?
To find me, the easiest place is my website, which is revitalizedman.com. And that's revitalized with a Z or Z for my Canadian friends. Revitalizedman.com. And from there, you can find videos, you can find links to social media, you can get in touch. Everything is fairly easy to find there. And I mean, if someone just Googles Bryan Hardy, Bryan Hardy, like Tom Hardy, like the actor. If you Google Bryan Hardy nutritionist, you'll find me. I'm not hard to find. So yeah.
Most excellent. And if you were listening to this, let's make it your 17-year-old self, and you're thinking, I don't know, maybe this makes sense to me, maybe it doesn't. Are there some specific things that people should think about that in their current lives that maybe spur them to seek out some help?
Yeah. So for me, and I know this is true for a lot of people, and it's just kind of the human condition. It's like, unless we have enough pain, right, to drive us in a certain direction, especially men, we're likely not to take action. But when I found out, because I struggled tremendously with acne from about age 13 up until, I guess, 18, 19. And once I realized, oh my God, this is mostly driven by what I'm consuming, right? I could have perfect glowing skin and have none of the insecurity of, popping pimples and bleeding and scabs and all that whole mess, which is not a fun place, no matter what age you are. Right. But I know there's a lot of younger people who deal with that and they think, oh, this is just hormonal. And I've not seen this case where you can't get tremendous improvement, if not complete removal of things like acne, which can be a real pain in the ass, that you can't treat that by just cleaning things up internally. So that would be one thing. It's like, what are the signs your body is giving you that something might not quite be right? If you're gassy regularly, burping, farting, feeling heavy after meals, if you don't have a really good, easy bowel movement every day, that's a problem, right? That is a problem. And most people don't realize it's a problem, right? Or if you're dependent on stimulants in order to have a bowel movement and in order for your brain to turn on in the morning, that's the problem, right? These are not natural things. They're not normal things. They become normalized because they're so common, but that's your body telling you through symptoms, I need some support here, right? Look at this, pay attention to this. And the more that you do, I can guarantee the better you'll feel, the more energy you're going to have, the more confident you're going to be, with romantic partners, in business, as a professional. All those things lead from you feeling your best.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Well, Brian, I have to say thank you because I think you've pointed out some things that are really, really important during the conversation today, and maybe things that people haven't thought about before. I love that you've actually gone on the personal journey, so you're not really just making this up. You've actually lived it, recovered from from real problems, and gotten better. Now you're helping other people, and so thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for sharing all that with us today.
My pleasure, artist. Thank you so much for having me. This has been fantastic. I really enjoyed getting to connect and getting to share, and I look forward to more.
I'm going to make sure that we link Revitalize Man in the show notes, and hopefully people will reach out and at least ask questions and get better understanding. And maybe we get to talk again some because I think we've only scratched the real surface of this conversation. I think there's a lot more that we could talk about.
Yeah, and one more little thing I might leave for the listeners, especially the men out there. There's a free guide on my website, which is all about, you might ask, well, how does this connect with the gut? Well, very clearly, the gut allows us to build all the things we're going to build, whether that's hormones, it's testosterone, whatever it is, neurotransmitters, all the things that allow us to feel good and to feel strong and to feel vital. That depends on a healthy gut. And so I put together a cheat sheet of natural things you can do to optimize your energy and your testosterone, right? For me, that was super supportive because there was a time where I was very, very low energy, low drive, low libido. And I knew, okay, something is not exactly right. And then I experimented a whole bunch and then ended up doing blood work. And according to the stats here in Ontario, I was off the charts high for my total testosterone, which is a good thing because those charts are not anywhere indicative of what's optimal. And so that's one other thing that I've lived the experience of feeling very low and depleted, and then proving to myself through nothing but basically nutrition and lifestyle that you can get dramatic improvements, both in terms of your subjective well-being, but also objectively in terms of optimizing those biomarkers that we think about when we're not feeling our best. So that's there at the website, revitalizeman.com/guide. Highly recommend people check that out. And save yourself a whole lot of stress and worry and research, and just go straight to the goods. Do this, don't do this, see how you feel, and then iterate from there.
Absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. So thank you again for the time you spend, and hopefully we'll get to catch up and do even more of this sometime soon.
That'd be great. Thanks so much.
If you've made it this far, then I have to thank you for your time. I hope you've learned something new and enjoyed listening to the discussion as much as I enjoyed having it. I'd love to hear from you about the show because we're working really hard to bring you great content, and the feedback really helps us get better. If you like what you've heard or watched, for those of you who are streaming out on YouTube, then take a split second to give us a thumbs up or a like. It really helps other people like you find the show too. And no one likes to miss out on the good stuff. So go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't have to wonder when or if there's a new episode. And until next time, stay remarkable.